It's said that music has charms to soothe the savage breast. Given the ubiquity of savage breasts in the world currently, music seems increasingly important to our mental health. But you know what's not good for my mental health? Realizing that albums that were released in 1975 are 50 years old this year, which means I must be, let's not go there. Hey there, Swan Shadow here. Welcome back to The Nest. This is the third and final video in our series entitled 30 Albums Turning 50 in 2025. So far we've looked at 20 albums, well actually 22 because we did a couple of double ups, but albums that were released in 1975. I'll save you the math, that was half a century ago. But 1975 was such a spectacular year for music that even though we've already considered more than 20 outstanding albums from that year, we've still got another 10 worth looking into. And who knows, I might even throw in some honorable mentions at the end. As I say every time we do one of these, please keep the following 3 points in mind. Number one, this list just represents my individual preferences. It's not intended to be a definitive analysis or the best albums of 1975. These are simply records that I have enjoyed and that have made some enduring impression on me personally. Your tastes may and indeed should vary, and where they do, you should mention that in the comments below. Number two, this list is not a ranking. I intentionally mixed these up randomly to make things more interesting and also to keep you guessing as to what's coming next. And number three, I've included original studio albums only. There are no live albums, compilations, or greatest hits sets here. So, let's do this thing. John Lennon was asked in an interview what he thought the Beatles would have sounded like had they continued into the 1970s. Lennon's reply was something on the order of probably something like Jeff Lynne's Electric Light Orchestra. Face the Music begins the trajectory that illustrates what Lennon meant by that. On its first 4 albums, ELO was very much a progressive rock band. In fact, the ELO album that immediately precedes this one, 1974's El Dorado, drove full force into the symphonic prog arena. The direction made for great music, but great sales? Not so much. So Lynne set for himself a challenge. How do we make the music we want to make, but within a sufficiently commercial niche that people will actually buy the records? The answer proved to be tighter, hookier standalone songs, freed from the extended suite structure that characterized ELO's earlier albums. The new approach on Face the Music scored ELO 2 international hits, Evil Woman and Strange Magic. A third single, Night Rider, failed to chart. In addition, the album's opening track, Fire on High, was adopted as theme music by CBS Sports, becoming a ubiquitous element of the network's branding for many years. You may not recognize Fire on High by title, but you most certainly know Lynne's distinctive guitar riff. Also, Lynne's introduction of sonic components associated with the then popular disco sound helped boost the record toward radio airplay. Face the Music also established what most fans would consider the classic ELO lineup. In addition to founding members Lynne and drummer Bev Bevan, the band now included Richard Tandy, who had joined ELO in 1971 as the bassist, but over time had switched roles to become the group's signature keyboard player. Kelly Groucutt, who replaced Tandy on bass. And the 3-part string section that put the orchestra in the name. Cellists Hugh McDowell and Melvin Gale, plus violinist Mick Kaminsky. A fun fact here, the memorably weepy guitar solo on Strange Magic was not performed by Jeff Lynne, but rather by keyboardist Richard Tandy. Lynne made several attempts to play the piece, but for whatever reason, he just couldn't master the fingering. So Tandy gave it a shot, and he's the one who executed the version that ended up on the final recording. Unhappy with the funk R&B influenced direction that Deep Purple was pursuing on its recent projects, guitarist Ritchie Blackmore exited that band after its 1974 album Stormbringer. He enlisted the members of Elf, a band that had been Purple's opening act on several occasions, to record what Blackmore originally intended as a solo project, but which evolved into the debut iteration of a new band, Rainbow. Wrapped in one of the cheesiest cover sleeves in rock history, the album Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow is actually less noteworthy for Blackmore himself than for its lead vocalist, former Elf frontman Ronnie James Dio, who would quickly become an icon of heavy metal. From the opening track, Man on the Silver Mountain, Dio's unique voice grabs your attention and doesn't let go. Dio's penchant for fantasy lyrical themes also helped brand the new Rainbow as a different beast from Blackmore's former ensemble. Blackmore and Dio put forward an engaging set of tunes on this album. In addition to the now iconic Man on the Silver Mountain, some of the other standout tracks include the hard-rocking Snake Charmer, an energetic cover of Quatermass's Black Sheep of the Family, and 16th Century Greensleeves, which presages the flavor of music that Dio would make with his subsequent bands, Black Sabbath, in which he replaced the fired Ozzy Osbourne, and the eponymous Dio. The Blackmore-Dio duo would make 2 more studio albums together, leading Rainbow, with a frequently changing supporting cast, before Dio would move on to those other things I mentioned. Blackmore then took Rainbow in a more commercial direction, with vocalists Graham Bonnet for one album, Down to Earth, and Joe Lynn Turner. In recent years, Blackmore has mostly focused on playing British folk music. Think of the kind of thing you might hear at your local Renaissance fair, with his wife Candice Knight, in the group Blackmore's Night. However, he does occasionally dust off Rainbow for a tour. Dio, sadly, lost a battle with cancer in 2010. Listening to Ambrosia's debut album, you'd be hard-pressed to find your way to the soft rock hitmakers they would become later in the decade. This debut is very much a progressive rock album, with hints of Yes and Genesis and Pink Floyd all over it. That latter, by the way, should come as no surprise, because the record was mixed by Alan Parsons, already at the time known for his work as an engineer on Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon, and before that, the Beatles' Abbey Road and Let It Be. The members of Ambrosia would perform in 1976 on the initial outing by Parsons' own creation, the Alan Parsons Project. Now, as progressive as this album is, it still managed to land a pair of singles on the Billboard Hot 100, Holding On to Yesterday, which hit number 17, and Nice, Nice, Very Nice, which got to number 63. The lyrics to that one were adapted from a poem in Kurt Vonnegut's novel, Cat's Cradle. The album itself climbed all the way to number 22 on the Billboard album chart, a pretty impressive accomplishment for a previously unknown American prog band. So it was evident from the start that something special was going on with these guys. It might surprise you to learn, it certainly surprised me, that Ambrosia is still a going concern in the present day. Original lead vocalist and guitarist David Pack has long since departed, having bailed in 2000. A significant level of acrimony between Pack and his former bandmates led to years of lawsuits being hurled back and forth. However, the other 3 members of the debut album lineup, bassist Joe Puerta, drummer Burley Drummond, and keyboardist Christopher North, have carried on with a variety of singers and guitarists since Pack left. Puerta was also the original bassist with Bruce Hornsby and the Range, who had a hit or three, while Ambrosia was on a mid-80s break. Although the band's next album, 1976's Taking It to the Streets, would usher in the second era of the Doobie Brothers with the arrival of Michael McDonald, Stampede has always felt to me like the album that set up that transition. Stampede is the first Doobies album with guitarist Jeff Skunk Baxter, previously of Steely Dan, in place as a full-on member. He had guest appeared on the previous two albums. And it was Baxter who introduced McDonald, who at the time was a Steely Dan sideman, to the Doobies when co-frontman Tom Johnston had to step away for a while due to health issues. Stampede also sees the Doobies expanding into new musical territory in several respects, adding some funkier elements to their California bar band sound. This evolution is most evident on songs like Music Man, which features orchestration by Curtis Mayfield that would have been a perfect fit on any of the day's top soul hits, as well as the number 11 charting cover of the Holland Dozier Holland Motown classic Take Me in Your Arms, Rock Me, which was arranged for the Doobies by Motown veteran Paul Reiser. There's no Michael McDonald on either of these two tracks, but listening to them, you can almost hear his approaching footsteps on the studio threshold. Some of the album's other highlights include the opening track, Sweet Maxine, a chugging rocker in the already established Doobie style, and the atmospheric I Cheat the Hangman, which manages to successfully meld a Western narrative with some sweeping symphonic elements, as progressive a number as the Doobies ever recorded. There's another tasty sleeper in the soulful, sassy I've Been Working on You, featuring one of the most impassioned vocals of Tom Johnston's storied career. Bassist Taran Porter is often the forgotten man of the Doobie Brothers' classic period, but his beautifully melodic bass lines are the secret sauce of this album. Credit also to the keyboard contributions of Little Feat co-founder Bill Payne, whose piano or organ work elevates nearly every track on this record. Payne would return to the Doobie Brothers fold decades later as one of their touring sidemen. Fighting is Thin Lizzy's second album featuring the guitar tandem of Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson. It finds the band finally coalescing around a signature sound that would launch their most successful period. Now, if you jumped aboard the Lizzy train when they began scoring radio hits like The Boys Are Back in Town and Jailbreak, both of which appeared on the 1976 album, also entitled Jailbreak, this is about as far back as you can go in the catalog and still find Thin Lizzy sounding like what you expect. Although Fighting marked Thin Lizzy's first chart impact in the UK, it made it to number 60 there. Real international success was still a year away. However, neither of the album's singles, Wild One and the Bob Seger cover Rosalie, would chart on either side of the Atlantic. Still, you can hear the good times coming. Overall, Fighting is a tight, tuneful hard rock record. Phil Lynott is an amazing voice, and he's beginning to display the songwriting acumen that would explode into full flower on the follow-up album. The twin guitars of Gorham and Robertson come out blazing and never let up. It's strange from today's perspective to think that there was a time when this kind of dueling six-string combination was not yet de rigueur in hard rock bands, as it would quickly become by the end of the decade. Drummer Brian Downey continues to show why he's considered by many aficionados to be one of the most underrated drummers in the business. The only downside here, at least for me, is the muddy, stereotypically mid-70s production. Lynott produced Fighting himself after a lackluster experience with producer Ron Nevison on the preceding album, Nightlife. It's only a minor issue, though. Fighting is an album worthy of a spin for anyone who enjoys classic rock. Here's a fun fact. The immediately recognizable Thin Lizzy logo makes its first and surprisingly only appearance on a studio album cover here. For a bit of marketing kit that became so widely known from concert t-shirts and other merchandise, it's kind of weird that the band only used this great logo once on an actual album. Your opinion of David Bowie's Young Americans will likely depend on two factors. Number one, whether you're okay with the thin white duke of glam rock attempting a left-turn experiment making a Philly soul record, and number two, if you are okay with the notion, how successful you find Bowie's attempt. I'm a qualified yes on number one. As for number two, I think the experiment mostly works. I say I'm a qualified yes on the first part because I'm okay with anyone making any kind of music that they want, as long as they're true to the music and authentic in the execution. So I don't have a problem with a British glam rocker making a Philly soul album if he does it right. From everything I understand about the making of Young Americans, I would say that Bowie did it right. He went to Philadelphia, he immersed himself in the local music scene, he recorded the album in an honest to Gamble and Huff Philly soul studio, Sigma Sound, alongside musicians with legitimate Philly credentials, and both solicited and implemented the ideas of these musical collaborators. That said, I think Young Americans is a pretty solid record that, for the most part, accurately captures the style that Bowie wanted to embrace. Some of the tunes work better than others. I'm not a huge fan of When, and I could have done without Bowie's ill-conceived cover of the Beatles' Across the Universe. But all of the songs are at least interesting, and several of them are outstanding. In the latter category, there's the title track, which serves as a contemporary Brits POV of 1970s US culture. There's Fascination, co-written by Bowie with a then unknown Luther Vandross, who sings backing vocals and styled the vocal arrangements throughout the album. Also, the joyous Somebody Up There Likes Me, and of course, the spicy, funky Fame, Bowie's collaboration with John Lennon and guitarist Carlos Alomar that became a worldwide smash. Bowie himself was uncertain about how well Young Americans turned out. I don't really see that he had that much to worry about. I think it's a fine addition to his discography. In fact, I count it among my favorite Bowie albums. And I believe music history is on my side on this one. You had to know that an album that includes a track about Marvel Comics characters was going to make this list. If I were to rank the Wings studio catalog, I'd probably slot Venus and Mars in second place, a notch below its immediate predecessor, 1973's Band on the Run. Venus and Mars is a fun collection of the kind of quirky but tuneful songs that Paul McCartney loves to write and perform, and he just happens to be exceptionally good at both. There's a little of everything in the McCartney repertoire here. An upbeat, raucous rock show, an angsty ballad, Love in Song, a charming novelty tune, You Gave Me the Answer, in which McCartney's vocal is filtered to sound like something being played on a Victrola. There's an odd but somehow effective nonsense pop song, that Marvel reference, Magneto and Titanium Man, a vocal showcase for bandmate and guitarist Denny Laine, Spirits of Ancient Egypt, a vocal showcase for Paul himself, in case we forgot who the headliner was, Call Me Back Again, a writing showcase for the new guy, Medicine Jar, co-penned by then recently hired guitarist Jimmy McCulloch, a smattering of inconsequential filler, of course, and the inevitable surefire radio hit, listen to what the man said. Surprisingly, there's little in the way of the silly love songs that McCartney's former Beatle bro John Lennon famously mocked. Paul would get around to addressing that comment on the 1976 follow-up, Wings at the Speed of Sound. What there is, though, is the sort of engaging, memorable pop and rock that helped gain everyone in the Beatles international fame and astounding fortune, in large part because Paul was there to help create it. Venus and Mars plays more lightly than, especially late period Beatles fare, but it's almost as much fun. I did say almost. There's an ongoing debate among aficionados as to whether Pink Floyd is or is not a progressive rock band. I've never really understood the reason for the argument, as it has always seemed apparent to me that Floyd is prog, even if the Floydian approach differs from more traditional prog acts such as Yes or pre-hit-making Genesis. There's an ongoing debate within my head as to whether Pink Floyd is or is not a band I enjoy. This argument I do understand because I sometimes find Floyd's music fiddly and obtuse in a way that kind of bugs me. I'm looking at you, The Wall. But when I do enjoy Pink Floyd, it's most often this album or its immediate predecessor, 1973's The Dark Side of the Moon. Wish You Were Here contains some spectacularly beautiful music. In particular, the two-part 9-movement epic that opens and closes the album, Shine On You Crazy Diamond. It's the band's tribute to co-founder Syd Barrett, who was dismissed from Pink Floyd in 1968 due to his erratic behavior, the combined effects of psychedelic drug abuse and deteriorating mental health. The degree to which the former contributed to the latter remains in question to this day. The Barrett theme continues with the title track, a pastoral number featuring guitarist David Gilmour on lead vocal. The remainder of the album amounts to an acerbic critique of the music industry in songs like Welcome to the Machine, with its Orwellian imagery, and Have a Cigar, which showcases lead vocals by British folk singer Roy Harper. So, is Pink Floyd a prog rock band? In my opinion, they are. And do I enjoy Pink Floyd's music? At least when it comes to this album, I do. And then there's Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti, or as I've always referred to it, Windows. I'm not generally a fan of double albums because they are too often an excuse to offload extraneous junk and get people to pay a premium for the privilege of muddling through it. There's some small factor of that at play on Windows, Physical Graffiti, but the overwhelming majority of the content earns its place in the Led Zeppelin discography. Physical Graffiti came to be what it is because Zeppelin emerged from their 1974 studio sessions with nearly enough material for 3 sides of vinyl. Rather than cut tracks that they were quite happy with, or release one disc with a blank side, which I suppose could have been another option, the band decided instead to create a double album using material that had been recorded for but not used on their previous 3 albums. This means that in addition to the 8 numbers from the 1974 Headley Grange sessions, we get to hear gems like Houses of the Holy, which was recorded as the title track for the earlier album of the same name, but weirdly left off its namesake release. There's The Rover, which Zeppelin had actually recorded twice, one acoustic version and another electric, for earlier albums without using either one. Black Country Woman, recorded outdoors in 1972 during the Houses of the Holy sessions. It features an airplane flying overhead just as the band is about to begin playing. And the lovely 1970 instrumental Bron Your Hour, or however that's pronounced, Just Jimmy Page on an acoustic guitar and nothing else, because sometimes that's all you need. That is not to say that the new stuff wasn't excellent too, because it is. Of course, the showpiece of the album is the epic Kashmir, which would become one of Zeppelin's most popular and enduring numbers. But pretty much everything else, from the opening track, Custard Pie, to the closer, the chugging, crunchy Sick Again, everything rocks. Okay, the Wanton song sounds like a rehash of other stuff that Zepp had done, and Down by the Seaside, which was a leftover from the Led Zeppelin 4 sessions, kind of a Beatlesque throwaway, but you know what? I'm quibbling here. Led Zeppelin never sounded better than they do on this album. Robert Plant is in stellar voice. John Paul Jones performs his often overlooked wizardry on a variety of stringed instruments and keyboards. John Bonham pounds the skins with his unrivaled power and feel, and Jimmy Page is Jimmy Page. Is Physical Graffiti Led Zeppelin's greatest album? I prefer just slightly Led Zeppelin 4 because it's tighter, more cohesive, and there's no filler on it. But if you give Windows, I mean Physical Graffiti, extra points for its diversity and its breadth, I'm not going to argue. We're probably both the best kind of correct. Of all the bands that I would include in my top, say, 20 all-time favorite bands, Jethro Tull might be the one band that would make for the toughest sell to somebody who wasn't already a fan. Tull is very much a specific and acquired taste, and either you get it or you don't sort of thing. Minstrel in the Gallery, the band's 1975 album, might be a good test. If you enjoy this record, more Tull will likely be your cup of silver liquid fire, to quote a line from Cold Wind to Valhalla, Minstrel's second track. If, on the other hand, things like Ian Anderson's distinctive voice, delicate acoustic guitar and frenetic flute, Martin Barr's raging electric guitars, Barrymore Barlow's tasteful drumming, and Dee Palmer's soaring, swirling orchestrations don't immediately hook you, you should probably just move on. This album is Tull at their Tulliest. And if you don't dig this album, then Tull is probably not for you. As it happens, I do dig this. Although I rather prefer it when Anderson tightens the songcraft reins into more concise pieces, as he does on my absolute favorite Tull albums, Stormwatch and The Broadsword and the Beast. I acknowledge that the more expansive musicality of an album like Minstrel in the Gallery showcases everything that made classic Tull classic. Is it a trifle noodly and meandering at times for my personal tastes? Sure, maybe. But did I thoroughly enjoy immersing myself in it again after not having listened to it for quite some time? Absolutely. Because musically, Minstrel embodies everything I want to hear Jethro Tull be and do. Tull, for many reasons, might not be your thing, but Tull is most assuredly my thing. At least it's one of my many things. And this album displays Ian Anderson and the band doing that thing as only they really ever did. And now for a bonus. I was a little bit conflicted about including this album because technically it's a 1976 release for US consumers. Mushroom Records, Heart's label at the time, released Dreamboat Annie in Canada in September of 1975, but didn't put it onto the US market until February of the following year. But ultimately, I decided to sort of hand wave that quirk of timing, especially in light of the fact that the first two Canadian singles from the album, How Deep It Goes and Magic Man, did indeed gain some radio airplay here in the US in 1975. And frankly, I didn't want to wait another year to talk about one of my all-time favorite albums by one of my all-time favorite bands. From the first stinging note of Magic Man, its opening track, Dreamboat Annie announced to the world that something new and exciting had arrived. Then Ann Wilson began singing, and the new and exciting something revealed itself as a force of nature. It is my considered opinion that Ann Wilson is one of the, pick a number, let's say 10, greatest vocalists in rock history. You could argue the point, but you would be wrong. Ann combined the psychedelic mystery of Grace Slick with the power of Janis Joplin, and added a beauty and delicacy of tone that is uniquely her own. Dreamboat Annie provided the perfect vehicle for Ann's voice, giving her the opportunity to showcase all of the colors of her unique instrument. She could belt and rage on the harder numbers, Magic Man, Crazy on You, White Lightning and Wine, or caress every subtle note of the ballads, Dreamboat Annie, I'll Be Your Song, How Deep It Goes. Ann's perfect counterpoint is her sister Nancy, who mostly plays acoustic guitar on this album, along with her stellar backing vocals. As essential to Heart's sound as her sister's singing, Nancy's deft touch on the sixth string provides what becomes essentially another unique voice. Try to imagine the opening of Crazy on You being performed by a different guitarist. Now, Nancy would ultimately play more lead guitar beginning in the early 1980s after Roger Fisher was fired from the band. Heart would go on to make more great albums across the course of their long and storied career. I would say that 1977's Little Queen and 1980's Baby Lestrange are probably even stronger than this one overall. But there's something just magical, no pun intended, about this album, which is another reason why I saved it for the final spot on this list. One inevitability of a series like this is that somebody's going to ask what albums just missed making this list. So I put together a few additional noteworthy releases from 1975. These are in no particular order, but coming in just under albums we've already talked about are Camel, the Snow Goose, Gary Wright, the Dreamweaver, Bebop Deluxe, Futurama. That one just missed the cut. Renaissance, Scheherazade and Other Stories, Foghat, Fool for the City, Roxy Music, Siren, Deep Purple, Come Taste the Band, Steve Hackett, Voyage of the Acolyte, another one that just missed the cut, Ohio Players, Honey, Supertramp, Crisis, What Crisis, and Angel, their self-titled debut. That concludes our deep dive into my favorite albums from one of my favorite years in music, 1975. It's hard to believe that all of these albums came out 50 years ago. Time flies when you're getting old. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. That really makes us look good in the all-seeing eye of YouTube and gives us the encouragement we need to keep producing this kind of content for your enjoyment. There's a ton of killer stuff coming here on this channel, so you'll want to be here when it lands. Until I see you back here in the nest, please be well and do well for someone. And you know I've got to ask, is there gas in the car? Yes, there's gas in the car.